We are the lost, we are the last, we are the unkind, we are the warriors at the edge of time, we are the cold, the cold, the deaf, the blind, fate's frozen forces, the veterans of the psychic war. How to go about creating a modern folk song, an electric folk song. Blue Oyster Cult struck with Veteran of the Psychic Wars in 1981, a fantasy of the future through the electric guitar. It was not all their own, though. A lyrical collaboration with author Michael Moorcock, the fusion of science fantasy and rock and roll. Neither Blue Oyster Cult or Moorcock were unfamiliar with the concept. Blue Oyster Cult had been delving the depths of pulp since 1972, setting cities on fire with rock and roll. Moorcock had previously written lyrics for the band Hawkwind, and got his start as a folk musician, skiffle musician, in England. The lyrical collaboration came about due to singer Eric Bloom's interest in Moorcock's Elric series. Bloom was interested in Moorcock's books, and Moorcock was reciprocally interested in Blue Oyster Cult's music. It is from there the tale of the psychic wars spiraled out. The confusion of science and fantasy, past and future, then veteran and champion. Moorcock had channeled his interests into lyrics for similar songs on Hawkwind's 1975 album Warriors on the Edge of Time, The Wizard Blew His Horn, Warriors, King of Speed, and Standing on the Edge. He would return to the band later to contribute even more songs and lyrics. Blue Oyster Cult did, and would continue to, have a mutually beneficial relationship with the many formations, mutations, and exiles of Hawkwind, one of those former members being a certain Ian Kilmister. Unlike where he occasionally lent his voice, or as he called it, declamatory chanting, to Hawkwind, Moorcock's collaborations with Blue Oyster Cult were purely lyrical, except in one extraordinary performance that didn't even include all the members of Blue Oyster Cult. Blue Oyster Cult, though, was no stranger to having outsiders lend their voice to the band. Moorcock's lyrics, Bloom's editing, and the blood and sweat of Blue Oyster Cult would generate Veteran of the Psychic Wars. The song was a scream from the future, the pensive, broken cries of a warrior, or even a champion, from the future, cursed to again and again confront eternity. The subject appealed to Moorcock's penchant to mesh fantasy, philosophy, and politics. Then the esoteric anger and angst that often filled Blue Oyster Cult's lyrics appealed to the sonic element of the band. It was an unusually ornate song for Blue Oyster Cult, involving multiple drummers and even a cellist. The marching drum beat drew on the very tribal rhythms of warfare. The purpose of Veteran became to reconcile the primal allure of violence and the synth hymns of a far-flung future, a rock and roll plea of annihilation. It was a common strategy of Blue Oyster Cult to mine the brains of the band, rock critics, poets, and even writers for lyrics. It was a productive formula, after all. It generated such hits as Godzilla, Burning for You, then Don't Fear the Reaper. There's another one, though. One song that was never technically a hit for Blue Oyster Cult, but the terminology continues to circulate in pulp and popular culture. Unlike Reaper, it's sort of a ghost of the future, Veteran of the Psychic Wars. The song arose from a particularly fruitful relationship between English author Michael Moorcock and Eric Bloom of Blue Oyster Cult, though the wider band was also interested in Moorcock's work. Bloom was an avowed fan of Moorcock's books. The two occasionally met in New York and in England when possible. Others in the band, though, also enjoyed Moorcock's contributions to things such as comic books, such as Albert Bouchard, who later collaborated with the Moorcock-associated project Spirits Burning. Bloom mainly enjoyed Moorcock's Elric series, the fantasy tales of the anti-hero albino sorcerer emperor of a decayed island empire. Bloom even pitched the idea of an Elric movie to Moorcock in the 1970s and 1980s, the idea being they could put Blue Oyster Cult's name on it for attention. One Blue Oyster Cult song, Black Blade, was specifically inspired by Bloom's interest in a possible Elric movie. It was basically a prototype for a possible theme. Unfortunately, the Elric adaptation never came to fruition. At that time, Moorcock was somewhat leery about having his work appearing on screens, but Bloom and Moorcock exchanged regular letters as friends. When asked by Bloom, Moorcock happily sent Bloom some lyrics for Blue Oyster Cult to use. As BOC retained a stockpile of lyrics from friends and contributors, inside and outside the band, Moorcock's lyrics were added to the vast lyrical medley of Blue Oyster Cult. Moorcock sent Bloom a mess of lyrics he had been toying with in his own band Deep Fix. Bloom took Moorcock's lyrics, then, usually, added a twist of Blue Oyster Cult style. This generated 3 Moorcock songs, or at least 3 songs Moorcock received credit for. The Great Sun Jester, Mirrors 1979, Black Blade, Cultosaurus Erectus 1980, and Veteran of the Psychic Wars, Fire of Unknown Origin 1981. All 3 derived from Moorcock concepts. The Great Sun Jester was partially inspired by the novel The Fire Clown, 1965, and also one of Moorcock's deceased friends. Black Blade was directly based on Elric's famous living sword Stormbringer, a weapon that subverts and twists its master so it may devour the world. Then, Veteran of the Psychic Wars was inspired more by a menagerie of Moorcock's concepts that he had earlier explored with Hawkwind. One possible influence on the lyrics being Jim Morrison's poem Far Arden that uses this phrase. It moves into the perimeter of "You're sacred, sincere, and dedicated, smile like a calm survivor of the psychic war. He was no general, for he was not old. He was no private, for he could not be sold." Though, as of now, there's no clear indication Moorcock had that exact poem in mind when penning the lyrics he sent to Bloom, or the lyrics he had used earlier with Hawkwind. Moorcock had first used the phrase "Veterans of the Thousand Psychic Wars" in the 1975 Hawkwind song Standing at the Edge, one of Moorcock's declamatory chanting songs. It used a pseudo-psychedelic space rock style, not uncommon with Hawkwind, that Veteran of the Psychic Wars would later invoke with similar language and soundscape. Hawkwind would again touch on this in other Moorcock songs like Sonic Attack. Standing at the Edge would be the first appearance of the exact phrase "Veterans of the Psychic Wars," which would go on to enjoy an immortality of its own. In 1981, Blue Oyster Cult, as a band connected to music business mogul Irving Azoff, was asked to provide possible tracks to the animated film Heavy Metal, 1981. The film was to be based on the material/comics from the science fantasy magazine Heavy Metal, which was often also inspired by those featured bands like Cheap Trick, Nazareth, Black Sabbath, Devo, and, of course, Blue Oyster Cult. The influence in creation was somewhat circular then. Blue Oyster Cult was sent an early script of the movie and asked to send back 4 or 5 possible songs to feature in it. Albert and Joe Bouchard, Eric Bloom, and band manager Sandy Perlman all took a swing at writing for the OST. Vengeance, The Pact, Soul Survivor, Heavy Metal, The Black and Silver, and the newly penned Veteran of the Psychic Wars were sent along for good measure. All except Veteran were heavily based on the script of Heavy Metal with a Blue Oyster Cult twist. Vengeance, The Pact, for example, was explicitly based on the Warrior Woman Tarna section of the film and was, according to some claims, originally exactly titled Tarna's Theme. All the songs except one were rejected by executives due to lack of time and to feature a wider variety of Azoff-associated bands in the film. The single song not rejected? The single song that had nothing to actually do with the film, Veteran of the Psychic Wars. Funny. Veteran, though, would be inserted somewhat haphazardly in the movie. It does not appear in any scene featuring war, warfare, or violence, and there are several in the movie. It featured in the discovery of Loch Nar, the evil green jewel of infinite green evil, seen in the Harry Canyon section of the film. Based on The Long Tomorrow by Mobius, whose comic, Airtight Garage, was also based on the Moorcock character Jerry Cornelius. Funny. All the music feels slightly haphazardly placed in the movie, to be honest. The Donald Fagen original track appears on the radio in the background. It's not even really a featured song. Fun movie, though. Moorcock was not even aware Veteran would be featured in Heavy Metal, and when he went to go see it in France, he remarked on his surprise in an interview, "I saw an advanced showing of the movie in Paris with all the guys from Metal Hurlant. We were all open-mouthed at the enormous number of lifts appeared in that film. I didn't know the album track was used, and a number of artists were amazed to see their styles ripped off. A strange experience. I met Eric in New York in the 70s, and he asked me for some lyrics. I gave him some. I've been performing myself with DF, the Deep Fix, and he modified the tunes to suit him. Eric wanted to make an Elric movie, but sadly we never got it together. Eric's an amazingly good performer on stage, too." Interesting to note, Michael Moorcock and Eric Bloom did perform Veteran of the Psychic Wars alongside Black Blade together on stage exactly once. The two performed together at DragonCon 1987, Dungeons & Dragons convention in Atlanta. The two were supported on stage by local Atlanta band Blitz and a medley of local musicians. So it was not exactly Blue Oyster Cult appearing with Michael Moorcock, instead it was Eric Bloom appearing with Michael Moorcock. It would be the one direct, live Moorcock-Bloom collaboration. Despite the appearance in heavy metal, Veteran would not really crack the charts. All the unused songs intended for heavy metal would end up on Fire of Unknown Origin in 1981. Burning for You would become the radio standout for that album, but Veteran was not ignored. It was highly respected by the band even before release. It was very much considered Bloom's greatest work at the time, later comparable to Buck Dharma's Reaper, and probably still is. Joe Bouchard has said on Veteran, "I think that's the best thing Eric's ever done. A great song. I like the songs that are very opaque. Songs that are what they are. Songs with different layers and sounds. Veteran's a good example of this. Opaque and with layers. Observers have noticed Veteran, stylistically, is Blue Oyster Cult's pseudo-metal hard rock style tamed with the complexities of 1980s synths, likely derived from the synth pop of the era. It was a composition engaging everyone in the band. Bloom on the forlorn vocals and provocative lyrics, Alan Lanier on the hymn-like synths that build up the alien atmosphere, Albert Bouchard on the tribalistic drums and snares that provide the oppressive sensation of warfare, Joe Bouchard's bass provides the remote corners of the otherworldly soundscape, then Buck Dharma on the legendary ethereal guitar solo that bends time and space. The Bouchard brothers were specifically inspired by their time in their high school marching band for the song, the marching rhythm inspired by their experience passing by a graveyard while in formation, purely Blue Oyster Cult. As rock critics like Martin Popoff have pointed out, the song resembles something like Queen's We Will Rock You in rhythm, though Albert Bouchard has stated his contributions on the song were inspired by Peter Gabriel's Intruder. This resulted in a song that was undefinably ominous, yet addictingly listenable. 4 live drummers, with tom-toms, were featured on Veteran, and even a cellist was brought in to provide strings for the song. That's why it has a sort of gothic flavor. Albert Bouchard thought it would be a standout hit. The song has an unstoppable force. One is pulled along by the violence and the regret, the plea to escape an endless nightmare. Don't let these shakes go on. It's time we had a break from it. It's time we had some leave. We've been living in the flames. We've been eating up our brains. Oh, please, don't let these shakes go on. Even when spoken, the rhythm can be heard in the lyrics. The very 1980s pop synths and rock elements of the song give it a, today, retro-futuristic soundscape. The lyrics invoke the dark, boundless future, but the actual composition sounds like a 1980s image of the future, in a good way, concerned with all the imperfect futures that could be seen from the 1980s, the shadow of Korea and Vietnam still long in the English-speaking world. Blue Oyster Cult songs openly embraced these worries and mixed them with pulp elements, represented here through Alan Lanier's keyboard work. It offers a dark counterpoint to the spaceship Earth argument of the 1960s and 1970s. Humanity was not so copacetic. It was no closer to peace, and peace could only be found through warfare. The threat of nuclear weapons kept the world in stability. This was, after all, in the freeze of the Cold War. Veteran of the Psychic Wars is completely futuristic, yet unnervingly familiar. The lyrics and subject matter taking something so familiar as warfare and casualties, then transposing it on a totally unknown conflict. A conflict of the mind that could take place in either fantasy or the far-flung future. The classic trick of science fiction. Even in all this madness, the human element remains. It is often called a post-Vietnam parable for a reason, though reducing the song to simply being a response to that historical conflict does a disservice to the song. One can easily read both the inevitable trauma of the soldier and the impossibility of peace in the lyrics. The element of insanity that, no matter what, where, or what time, the warrior can never escape the war. You ask me why I'm weary, why I can't speak to you. You blame me for my silence, say it's time I changed and grew. But the war is still going on, dear, and there's no end that I know. If Don't Fear the Reaper is fantasy, then Veteran of the Psychic Wars is science fiction. Veteran itself is far more fatalistically pessimistic than the romantic carpe diem of Reaper, though. Blue Oyster Cult rendered Veteran as an electric folk song. It is a universal warning for any conflict, new or old, fears both new and old. Veteran could take place in the far-flung past of savage warriors and wizards, on the modern battlefield of ballistic weapons and mass tactics, or in the distant future of metal men and psychedelic tattoos. Veteran is able to inflame and confabulate old and new images of warfare, both the iron sword and the nuclear weapon. Moorcock's philosophy and preferred themes easily linked into this. mainly the Eternal Champion. The Eternal Champion is Moorcock's concept of the eternally reoccurring embodiment of law or order that opposes chaos. It is important to note that when Moorcock invokes order and chaos, it does not necessarily map onto concepts of good and evil. That's the point. There's a large gray area. Order is the manifestation or enforcement of certain universal laws, and chaos, in short, is the instinct to overthrow them and create a new equilibrium. Elric is the most famous embodiment of this, but Moorcock admits the schema infects all his writing. The concept is intended to be perennial, eternally reoccurring. As Moorcock contributed the lyrics, that perennial return also touches Veteran. The song offers a timeless look towards eternity. Once again, Veteran is an electric folk song that can be played again and again, basically anywhere. Even if the Veteran is not the regular idea of a character, this is a song after all, the role or idea of the Veteran exists eternally. The Veteran is more a figure of folklore and mythology. The provocative lyrics invoke both PTSD, but also the more mythological concept of the war projected through the language of science fiction. Anyone can read into the song. World War III as a totally decentralized conflict that involves every human through information, the constant evolution of warfare, the moral complexity of an individual engaged in a conflict they despise, but still thirst for victory. The identity of the Veteran has been blasted away. All the scars are on the inside. I'm not sure that there's anything left of me. The only thing left is the war. And does not every person have their own little war? The Eternal Veteran is flung into conflict again and again, but never abandons their post. Veteran of the Psychic Wars has turned into a cultural hallmark for both rock and metal. While it, ironically, never burned as bright as this album sibling Burning for You on the charts, Veteran's dark prestige has earned it a slice of cultural immortality. Veteran attempts to tango with a higher subject matter than Burning for You, and that's not dismissive to say. Beside the original album version, the live version off ETL, Extraterrestrial Live, 1981, also imbued the song with immortality for featuring one of Buck Dharma's best guitar solos, if not his best, maybe only matched by the solos for some of the live versions of ME262. The Extraterrestrial Live version of Veteran is an ornate epic that pushes Veteran of the Psychic Wars up to around 8 minutes, almost double the album version. Other live versions have followed, but none compared to the October 9th, 1981 performance featured on Extraterrestrial Live, which outshines every other version in all aspects. That is not to dismiss the other cover versions, I just think the Extraterrestrial Live version is the best and greatest incarnation of the song, even above the original album version. There's been plenty of covers which put their own spin on Veteran though. Metallica, always one to pay homage to Blue Oyster Cult because they have several times, has covered Veteran live at least twice. As people on the internet have pointed out in the comment section, Metallica's version of Veteran is far more stripped down and savage. It emphasizes the tribal nature of Veteran, tooth and claw rather than ESP and nuclear weapons. The Finnish metal band Terror has created their own rendition of Veteran likewise. It emphasizes the more metal edge of Veteran. There's some nice twists in the vocals in this version. Then Dutch rock metal impresario Arjen Anthony Lucassen, Ayreon, covered a Veteran on his futuristic concept album Lost in the New Real. Did you know Rutger Hauer is on this album? Ayreon's Veteran is likely the most studio-produced of any of the versions, highly emphasizing the synths to slot it into the album's concept of an unreal, highly simulated future. Ayreon's vocals on it highly muted and pensive. It feels not stripped down, but smaller with a few interesting tweaks to the licks. Want another more out there version? User Morphix has crafted a cover version of Veteran in the Turok, yes, video game Turok, sound font, Turokwave. This feels very appropriate, almost spooky. The human element that remains in Veteran is meant to be frightening, or at least jostling. Send me to the rear, where the tides of madness swell and have been sliding into hell. Oh please, don't let these shakes go on. Veteran will surely survive right beside Reaper, sort of as its shadow. Veteran brutally remythologizes modernity with all the lesions, warts, and wounds of warfare. The return of an unadulterated myth that fatalistically employs both the realistic, fantastic, and futuristic. Physical, mental, and spiritual exhaustion. Cultural references to the phrase Veteran of the Psychic Wars abound. Why? The words are provocative and, inevitably on the internet, relatable. The eternal veteran lives on through the perennial folk song of the modern age, the electric age, the rock age, the internet age, the psychic age. Did I hear you say, this is victory? Would you believe me if I said Morphix's cover of Veteran of the Psychic Wars is my favorite cover of the song? 'Cause it is. Standing on the edge of time, I'd like to give a thank you to my supporters, Vylanon, and an anonymous patron.